Hello and welcome to a special edition of the State of the Fleet Market video series produced by Automotive Fleet Magazine. And this series is designed to spotlight key leaders in the commercial fleet management industry. And today I have the honor to interview Pat O'Connor. He's the longtime legislative counsel for the NAFA Fleet Management Association. So thank you, Pat, for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike, for giving me the opportunity.
So what we'd like to discuss today is the impact that the pandemic has had on personal use and how it's created an unintended tax consequence for a lot of employees that are using company-provided vehicles. So to start the discussion, I'm wondering if you could provide some background information on how the shelter-in-place mandates created this situation.
I'll be glad to, Mike. In valuing personal use of an employer-provided vehicle, which is a fringe benefit, there have been basically three proposals you could follow, policies you could follow: annual lease value, commuting value, and cents per mile. Most commercial fleets are using annual lease value because it's the simplest and most direct. Basically, the IRS publishes a table that shows the fair market value of a vehicle and then the annual lease value of that vehicle. That annual lease value then is used to compute the personal use of that vehicle. So for instance, if the annual lease value of a vehicle is $10,000, the portion of the use of that vehicle that is personal miles, that percentage would be, of the 10,000 would be the personal tax benefit for the employee. What we found, though, after I was alerted to it by some NAFA members, was that during the shutdown, that in that 3, 4, 5 month period, there were no business miles being driven on these vehicles. Employees, salespersons were working from home, working virtually, working via Zoom, possibly not working at all, and the cars were parked. So there were no business miles being traveled during the shutdown, but there were some personal miles, whether it was 1 mile, 10 miles, or 100 miles. But under the annual lease value rule, what happened is all of those miles were considered personal use. And so if the annual lease value on a monthly basis was, say, $1,000, and suddenly the only miles being driven in that month were personal, the taxable fringe benefit became $1,000, where if normally the personal miles may have been 20% of the miles driven that month, so you'd have a personal use charge of $200, suddenly you had a personal use charge of $1,000. It was certainly an unintended consequence of the pandemic, something that no one could have foreseen. Something that neither the IRS nor Treasury Department could have foreseen. But it became obvious that this was a punitive action on fleet drivers, an unintended consequence of the pandemic, but was distorting personal use of employer-provided vehicles.
And I know NAFA and yourself in particular, you've been conducting outreaches to both the IRS, the Senate Finance Committee, and the House Ways and Means Committee on trying to mitigate and rectify this situation. Can you share with the viewers what NAFA is proposing and to resolve this unintended consequence?
Sure, be glad to. I started out first by reaching out to the counsel's office at the IRS. To the person who handles the personal use issues. She's actually housed at the Treasury Department. IRS, of course, is part of Treasury. I reached out to her to talk to her just about the issue, the problem. She was very receptive. Since she had worked on annual lease value issues in the past, she was sympathetic. Of course, sympathy doesn't get you a long ways with the IRS. I followed up with her then, and I sent to her the calculations that a NAFA member had made as to the real life impacts of this unintended consequence. And I sent it to the counsel's office She got back to me. They have been working on it, discussing it, socializing it within the lawyers at IRS and Treasury Department. What we proposed was, right now, under current IRS regulations, you cannot use a combination of the annual lease value rule and the cents per mile rule. You can't combine the two during the course of the year. We suggested, though, by allowing a fleet to use the cents per mile rule, you would then be able to charge the driver for his or her actual personal use without skewing the personal use, as happens with the annual lease value. We have proposed that they provide a waiver. Under IRS regulations, since you can't combine annual lease value and cents per mile, and to propose a regulatory change would require a rulemaking that could take a year or more. We've asked the commissioner of the IRS to grant a waiver. He has done that before, and there is an executive order from the White House to the various federal agencies to ease regulatory burdens anytime there's an unintended consequence of an existing regulation because of the pandemic. So we have officially requested that waiver from the commissioner of the IRS to help move the process forward, so to speak. We've also reached out to the chairman and ranking member of both the Senate Finance Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee. Those are the two tax writing committees, and of course, the two committees that have oversight jurisdiction of the IRS. We've asked them to weigh in with the IRS commissioner on this. So that's where we stand today. We've requested a waiver, and we're waiting to hear back. Most recently, I heard last Friday from the counsel's office that it was still a work in progress on their end.
So what if it's a work in progress? What are the next steps? Do we just simply sit and wait for them to respond, or is there other things that you could do on behalf of NAFA and the fleet industry?
It's, honestly, it's a combination of sit and wait, but also continue to I'll use the term nudge the consul's office to resolve this. And we'll do that primarily by getting support from the tax writing committees. We have been in contact with the tax writing committees, and now I'm talking to them on almost an every other day basis to get them to weigh in. One of the things you always need to do when you're trying to resolve a regulatory issue like this is you've got to keep it on the front burner. Simply sending a letter is not sufficient. We sent the letter. Now we've got to nudge them or nag them on it. They certainly understand the topic. We just have to get them to understand the importance of resolving it. And what we've done, honestly, by suggesting that they grant a waiver to allow use of the cents per mile rule during the course of the shutdown, is we've given them an option to consider. And if they don't like that option, we feel then it's incumbent upon them to come up with another option. But strategically, by putting an option out there, we've given them something to respond to.
Right. In this interim period, a lot of fleet managers get calls from their drivers who recognize that what this tax consequence is. What would you recommend to fleet managers to say to their drivers? How is it best for them to be addressing this situation?
I think the best way is to let the drivers know that the fleet manager is well aware of the problem and is part of an effort to get the IRS to address the problem. Unfortunately, until the IRS addresses the problem, there's not much else we can do. I would suggest that the NAFA member, that the fleet manager, advise either corporate counsel or the corporate accounting office of this issue. Their people may be able to come up with other ideas for mitigating the impact of the annual lease value. NAFA is not is not positioned to provide that kind of tax advice.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're trying to do is get the IRS to put something down on paper that the fleet manager can use. Otherwise, the fleet manager just needs to assure the drivers that we're aware of it, we're working on it, but if necessary, the fleet manager is going to have to turn this issue over to the tax and accounting people.
Very good. Well, that's good advice, Pat. And we'll definitely stay in touch with you and keep us posted on how this is progressing. I think you're making an important contribution to the commercial fleet industry, and it's also commendable to NAFA, where you're representing the interest of not just NAFA members, but also the interest of the industry as a whole. So on behalf of the industry, I'd like to thank you and NAFA for your efforts, and best of luck in your future conversations with the IRS and the other governing bodies, Senate Finance Committee and House Ways and Means Committee. And until then, we'd like to say thank you for participating in this and all the best in the future. So thank you.
Thank you.